Hello, it's Jerry Ward back with my guest, Carla T. Main, the author of Bulldozed, Kilo, Eminent Domain, and The American Lust for Land, and also Wright Gore III, a victim of eminent domain. And, Carla, I want to come back to you. Part of your book is entitled The American Lust for Land. Mm-hmm. And one thing that I found very interesting about your book was the historical and legal perspectives surrounding eminent domain, going back to our founding fathers and their concerns. Mm-hmm. Why don't you give us a little history lesson here, a little teaser from your book about all the great stuff we could learn about history in this particular area?
Sure. One of the important things to keep in mind about, Americans and our relationship to the land is that, it's a good thing, and in some ways it's a bad thing, because we love the land and we can grow rich from the land, but we can also be greedy and avaricious when it comes to our desire to own the land, because it is so important to Americans. And so this was something that the founders understood, and it's something that I believe James Madison understood. And when he sat down to do a draft of the Bill of Rights for the first Congress, he drafted the Takings Clause. And it's very interesting because nobody asked him to draft a Takings Clause. He got requests from all of the states for what they wanted to see in the Bill of Rights. And, he had a certain amount of political capital to spend. And he threw in a Takings Clause, even though none of the states' delegates had requested it. But one of the things that Madison did was he looked at a lot of news clippings, because there were a lot of newspapers in colonial times, and he wanted to get an idea of what are people concerned about all up and down the seaboard in all of the colonies, or by that time they were states. What are people thinking about? And he also knew what the big issues were of the time. And both before and immediately after the Revolution, there were a lot of land seizures going on. People were grabbing up land that had belonged to loyalists, and very often they were taking it on very little evidence that people had actually been loyalist or Tory sympathizers. And Madison was part of a very elite kind of part of society, because he was a landowner. And so he put in the Takings Clause and tied it to the Fifth Amendment, which is where our due process protections are, because he knew, as a member of that generation, that land ownership was extremely important, because at that time, if you didn't own land, you couldn't vote and you couldn't hold public office. And the Bill of Rights at that time was only applicable to the federal government. It's not the way it is today, because we have the incorporation clause, which makes it applicable to the states.
Right.
But he was very, very forward thinking. And so, what started to happen in the 19th century is that little cases emerged here and there, which started to expand eminent domain. And there was a very important case early in the 19th century that was tried by Daniel Webster. And, of course, he was a great lawyer, a great orator, a great statesman. And in many ways, eminent domain never changes. There's always some kind of scam that a local municipality is trying to pull to save money, And so there was this case up in Brattleboro, Vermont, and there was a highway. And back in the early 19th century, a lot of roads and highways and bridges had tolls. And that was because it was very expensive to build highways and bridges and roads and things like that. So anyone who made an investment in building it wanted to get back the money that they spent. So they would put up a toll. And so the people in this town had a bridge, and they were sick and tired of paying the toll. So they decided that they would pass a law basically taking this bridge in eminent domain and saying that they were going to, lay down a new road, before and after the bridge. And the bridge owner said, you know what, this whole thing just stinks to high heaven. It's real phony baloney. They didn't really build a bridge. And they've, this statute that they passed is really, a form of eminent domain, because they've taken the the franchise I had, this right to operate this bridge. So Webster takes the case up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court sort of dances all around the facts and says, well, we really think that you can, take the franchise in eminent domain. You can take this business interest. And Webster says, well, wait a minute here. There's a more important right at stake. You're messing around with the contract between the municipality and this corporation, and you're stretching. You're starting to expand this right of eminent domain beyond what it was originally meant to do. And if you do this, then you're opening the door to the use of eminent domain for all sorts of other mischief, for political agendas. And Webster was a politician, and he was predicting that eventually various factions would be able to use eminent domain to further political agendas. And he was right, because in the 20th century, what happened with eminent domain was that all sorts of movements, such as the urban renewal movement, the artistic urbanism movement, and later, people who were championing economic development, public-private partnerships, were able to use eminent domain as a tool. So Webster was absolutely right. He predicted that in 1848, and that's what we are seeing today.
Well, the way I'd characterize that is the first case you talked about is basically the people, just out of pure democracy in a way that was applied in the French Terror, just got together and decided, well, we don't care that this guy made this investment in this bridge and that we made promises to him about it. We're going to take it anyway. Right. And then it morphed in the 20th century to a removal project of poor black people from the inner city so that upscale people could gentrify it and have nice condos and apartments. That's essentially what that became. And then one thing that you talk about in your book is the Midkiff case out in Hawaii, which what that was supposed to be was to take land from the oligarchs and divide it up. That's one of the cases that you talk about in the book, isn't it?
Yeah. I do talk about Midkiff. I think the urban renewal thing, it started out with a lot of good intentions and kind of went haywire. And, what happened with urban renewal was that, you had a lot of people who thought, oh, we're going to remake America and we're going to remake America's cities. And they used eminent domain, way too much. And it was very unfortunate. I think that it had a lot of tragic consequences.
Well, that's the problem with good intentions when you're using social engineering, because the rats get hold of it and destroy the good intention, and you just essentially wreak havoc on a society. I want to thank both of you, Wright and Carla, for being with me today. Carla, tell everybody really quickly where they can get your book.
Bulldoze is available on Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com, and in bricks and mortar Barnes and Noble if you go to the store. But you can get it on Amazon and on my website, carlamain.com.
I highly recommend your book. It's a great book. I greatly enjoyed it. Yeah, and Wright, I respected you during that first interview, but after reading that book, I respect you and your family 100 times even more.
Well,
so thanks for being with me.
Thanks.